Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds, and today I am hanging out with Frank Mentzer. He is a freaking legend in the industry and has touched all the things that I loved as a child. Um, I actually had caught another interview with you, and you're talking about your favorite box set to work on, which that was actually my favorite piece of art for the longest time. And that is
Thanks. Well,
that is
thanks for your kind words. Happy to be on Nerdarchy. I understand you have a great audience and you've built up a nice show here for a while. So honored to be on.
well, we're honored to have you. Yeah, we've been working at it. We're going into year 4 now. And with your year 4, we added these live chats, so we get to hang out with cool people in the industry. And your people reached out to us because you have a really ambitious project going on right now. So I think mainly we're going to talk about that. We'll probably delve into some other areas as well. My poor audience, I'm always crushing them with these cool things to spend their money on.
Well, it's real life out there. You know, we have to save up our money, allocate our bills, take care of all that. But I think it's important for quality of life to budget some luxury time in. And a little bit on the fringes, squeeze out a little here and there. And whether it's going to see a movie or playing games at home or whatever. Now, gaming is a lot more cost effective than going to movies. So that's where I'm at, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, think about it. You buy, even if you don't have to, but even if you spend $50 on an adventure that you're going to run for weeks and weeks and weeks for 5 or 6 people, that you can't get a better value. I can't take my family to the movies for that amount.
Yeah. The project I'm offering is called Imperia. Being my first Kickstarter, you'll see a huge goal up there, a big list of guest stars, and a lot of ambitious plans. To make it happen, I've tried to bring all my professional expertise, like with my CEO hat, as much as my writer hat. Pulled together a team of more than a dozen people to handle all the hard work of cranking out a product, between the graphics, the web work, all the different aspects of a modern project these days. I don't do web work at all, so I need friends and experts to handle that. The media setup, all of that business stuff. But at the same time, we are reaching out through Kickstarter and trying to present my campaign world of 40 years in all its depth and richness for everybody to share and enjoy. We've chosen a couple of key points in how we offer this. One, we piled a bunch of guest stars on, all old friends of mine, to write little sections of Empyrea, essentially places, an inn at a crossroads, a small shipping fleet on the coast, from Skip Williams on that one. He's got a great maritime background. I'm letting each of the authors choose something they're personally really good at, really interested in, doing little vignettes. And frankly, at the end of the project, if you don't like Empyrea, just steal those vignettes and drop them in your campaign. I mean, you got all these great tools by high-end pros. And then we assembled this who's who list of legendary artists, Elmore Easley and more, Darlene doing the maps, just like the old box set from '83 of Gary's. All of this feel-good nostalgia. To go with that, though, it's a lot of nice icing, but you have to have a good underlying game and campaign there. We are not selling a game, we're selling backdrop to your story, because being gamers, we know the stories about you, your characters, their action, their lives. So we're keeping Empyrea in the background as a new setting option at first, when you first arrive. How you start playing is whether you generate characters in the setting or bring them in, port them in, teleport, plane shift, reality, however you rationalize it as a game master. Have an adventure they're already planning on, and we'll give you a guideline as to where to place it in Empyrea. So your game will basically shift the backgrounds, but continue as normal. Same characters, same rules, same everything. Now, we got to do a lot of work to make that happen for you, so that's the nature of the project. You can read more details about it on our website and on the Kickstarter page.
Now, I think there's something really important to mention here, and that's because we don't see these anymore, but this is actually an old school classic box set.
Mm-hmm. It's the modern commerce has changed the way writers, artists, and everybody are paid. We were talking before the show about the abysmally low standard rates for professional writers and things, from online publications and elsewhere. Those are some that the writers have to cope with to stay alive. I'm trying to consolidate writers and try it a different way as a design house, instead of just a game manufacturer out to drive the bottom line, support the game, do the good things like paying the artists, writers, and stuff. You know, people are making living off of this stuff, but it's hard. It's a hard life, and you got to watch the bottom line, combine business expertise with grand and glorious ideas of gaming and designs.
Yeah, so yes, Doug, who's in our chat, it actually comes in a box.
What you get is 2 huge core books, more than 200 pages each, is the current around 400 pages at least. 3 little brown books just for yucks. I grew up on the original D&D set, so I want some specific player info and game master info, you know, in little brown books in my set. We don't provide dice, miniatures, or things like that, so that helps keep the weight down and the costs down. We do provide full-size Darlene maps, just like, as I say, that is one of the major selling points. So you'd be able to, if you have an old map of Gary's campaign from the 70s or 80s, the early TSR products, you can hang up its companion now, a continent on the same planet. Now, the way that worked is when we published module R4, Doc's Island, back an old RPGA adventure, I wrote up some background on my campaign to put in that. And Gary and I discussed it, and he finally approved it. I have his actual memo here, and we're going to be reproducing that and making it freely available. But basically, he said, yes, it can be on the same planet as World of Greyhawk, but it can't have any connection to it, any ongoing whatever. So I constructed and we constructed rationales as to why this is the case. Unfortunately, he was then forced out of TSR. I left soon thereafter. We took another shot with a different company. That didn't work, and it never got published. We lost my friend in 2008, of course, and it's taken me this long to put together the project and produce this the way my old friend Gary would have wanted it and approved it still, I firmly believe. We don't use this as a major marketing point. A lot of people don't care about Gary, and a lot of people don't even remember me, for that matter. We're realistic about this. But the major selling point is usability, the focus on the characters, the multiple game systems. We figured out how to address things like that. So that's what we're talking about now.
Well, I don't know. I think everyone should care about Gary at least a little bit for getting the ball rolling. You know,
well, certainly. And we give him incredible credit as the founder of TSR, co-creator of the original game itself, and look at everything that has grown from that. But it's a real old approach. His work at the time was as best it could be imagined, but was still primitive compared to 40 years later. I mean, that's where we're at, man. Nearly half a century of development at this. So, of course, things are more accurate, more fully developed, things like that.
I have a question. It's kind of unrelated, but were you at TSR when they released the Marvel Phase Rip system?
Jeff Grubb and the Marvel team did an incredible job. I loved playing that game. The color coding system, the various other aspects of it, it was breakthrough stuff at the time. I was so busy with my line, the D&D Basic Red Box line and subsequent, that unfortunately one of the worst things of that era is I didn't get invited to like synergize and hang out at lunch, you know, with Jeff and the various other guys. Loved the system, never was able to spend much time at it though. Doggone.
The only reason I brought it up is because we recently just started playing a live play of it, and someone mentioned it in the chat that Macabre Mother Lover, OMG, old Marvel, then this, I'm in heaven, Rip Gary. So you know, we have a lot of respect for the tradition and old stuff that came before here at Nerdarchy. I mean, all of us are in our 40s or approaching our 40s. So
don't get me wrong, I fully support 5e. In the Imperia campaign specifically, I don't want Aasimar because of the extra planar connections and background and a power thing. I do support Dragonborn, believe it or not, as well as Firbolg and other oddball characters like that, as I call them, outside the mainstream, you know, human or demi-human core. Shouldn't say oddball, though. That denigrates your choices. It provides more options. And the rules, I was lucky enough to hang out with Jeremy Crawford for nearly a week in Italy. as all this was launching, and a lot of great stuff going on. I've gotten to know Mike Merles since then rather well. And they did such an amazing job of modularity, the way I think of it. You can drop whole chunks of the game system and it won't upset the game system. I mean, the balance that they build in is just dynamite. It'll address the new school, as we call it, focus on detailed combat options, character development, builds, things like that. And it'll also support old school story-based, minimal combat type gaming. Very flexible and a dynamite job by those guys. I think they got told behind the scenes, look, after the miniatures game that we know as 4E, which I think rocks as a fantasy miniatures game, frankly. I mean, it's beautifully designed, easily, just wonderfully organized. You can sit down and be playing like in less than an hour and just totally rocking it. But it de-emphasized some of the role-playing aspects, and they realized that right away. So they listened to people. The polls, if you remember the 5e polling and early testing, they really shaped it for what people want. And hats off to them. Great job.
Yeah, 5e actually snuck up on us, believe it or not. We weren't paying attention. We had played 4e for about a year and a half. We enjoyed that. Like, I am that guy that had pushed our group into every edition of the game.
Okay.
Wizards, or TSR Wizards, they're doing something different. Let's check this out. But what 4E kind of did for our group is it opened it up by changing the mechanics so much to where it was a decent game, but it really wasn't D&D as we understood it.
Right.
To play other systems, and we just started playing in Green Ronins, Mutants, and Masterminds, and we played like fantasy, superhero, urban fantasy over in that system for a while. Took our head out on the sand and said, oh, Wizards of the Coast is putting out a new edition of D&D. I guess we should take a look at that. And at the time, we had just started doing Nerdarchy. We were maybe 6 months into it when they released the free PDF. And we started looking at it, and we're like, oh, man, this is everything I liked about each of the editions.
Yeah, they were paying attention. I think along the way, somebody stopped paying attention for a little while, and they refocused on us, the gamers, and now we have the results, and it is very cool.
I don't know so much that they stopped paying attention as maybe they shifted their attention to someplace maybe mistakenly. They looked at video games, right? They're like, well, look how much video games has drawn from us. Maybe we can do the same and it will be reciprocal. And it just wasn't.
Well, a good example and a parallel, I think, is within our Imperia project. We put the focus on what we thought would sell, and it turned out not to be the high features. We're doing some revision now and focusing on the online campaign, personal gaming, what you can do in the campaign. And that turns out to be a real popular topic amongst my fans and my purchasers. And thank you. At Wizards and at other game designers groups, you look at the entire system, and it's real hard to tell from that perspective which parts are going to be more popular and which parts aren't, see? And you make your best guess, and you decide what to feature, and it turns out then the massive gamers want something else or something slightly different, so you have to shift focus. But it's hard to pick out from a player perspective what's going to be popular when you're a game designer, okay? It's different hats and radically different perspectives. So we learn. If we're smart, we listen to you and we learn.
And it only makes sense. Doug has a question. D&D these days says the focus first on story. What was it like back in the day? Was there as much RP and dungeon delves and stuff?
Oh boy, back in the day. First, remember, I'm not one of the founders. I'm a latecomer. I showed up like 6 years after the game had been invented and was out there and so forth. Before me came greats like Lawrence Schick and Harold Johnson, Zeb Cook, of course, Jim Ward, the early supplements, and of course, Gary and Dave Solo, and all the various people back then. Tim Kask, who helped build Advanced D&D in the first place, who helped Gary in private conference. So from that perspective, in the early days, we were mostly playing with a new toy. We didn't know what to do with this role thing. We're war gamers, man, in the 70s. And it's a combat tactical simulation, basically, but with new opponents, with new factors, magic. Okay, this whole magic thing. Oh, my God. What do you do? And so we were all learning. So we weren't consciously into role-playing except for one thing. Back during the war game days, when we had a big campaign and it was about war game battles, a lot of attention was played to how do you get to that battle? What was the interaction, the diplomacy, the characters, the leaders? What were they saying that led to this big battle? So we had games where we sent memos at TSR. I was Gary's partner in a Napoleonics game. He was Napoleon. I was the commander of the French Navy. He took care of the armed forces on the ground. We were up against the Spanish Armada, Great Britain, Russian forces, German, all sorts of different factions. And we would send memos back and forth between, oh yeah, Joe in purchasing and shipping. No, he's actually playing the Pope, you know, in this. And so you'd have to sort out your inter-office memos as to which ones are in-game and which ones are actually business. But we were actually role-playing our tails off outside of the game as early as mid-70s, early 80s, in addition to playing war games, role-playing games then at the table. And we go away from the table and then come back to the table. So all this role-playing was going on nonstop. In Empyrea, we're going to try and bring some of that back. Do a lot of role-playing by email, through the website, leading up to events in the campaign. And it'll all be interacted and linked together and so forth. Big project.
Yeah, so one of the things we were talking about before we actually went live was the fact that it's going to be a living world, which, so to me that says organized play. Or you guys are going to do some kind of organized play in conjunction with the release of the Imperium. Yes,
and let me qualify that. Most organized play setups are system based. Eric Mona has built a tremendous Pathfinder support society, the PFS. He's even boasted to me personally about a great big gaming club around Moscow, Russia. Now that's outreach, that's support from the top, also volunteers for regional and national basis, you know, a huge elaborate organization, great job there. It's modeled, he told me, after what I tried to do in the 80s and 90s with the RPGA, the Role Playing Game Association from TSR, predecessor to a lot of these things. The organized play program from Wizards, I don't remember all the terms for it, but both for DMs, publishers, players, the whole works. Again, a well thought out active support system. For Empyrea, though, we're supporting essentially 3 games. Now, the headline says 10 game systems. It's actually 3 games: Dungeons & Dragons, Runequest, Savage Worlds. Okay. Within D&D, though, that's where we see the most sub breakdowns, and it gets into, it's sort of like different related languages within one group, you know, like Latin is related to English and German and all these others. We've found in analysis that the stats, the mechanics are not that different between the 5 OGL or open game license versions of D&D. And of course, the 3 core versions we're addressing, 5e, Advanced, 1E, 2E, basically going with allowing 2E kits, but 1E architecture. And then my system, the red box basic system. They aren't all that different. Most of the differences are like the last 5% of specific numbers. Our biggest hurdles and the big ongoing project now, behind the scenes, involving 4 different designers and experts, is comparing RuneQuest, Savage Worlds, and the D20 D&D based systems, and analyzing the differences and maximizing compatibility. What we're trying to do is modify the campaign to fit your game system, not telling you what things to drop from your game system, you know, to fit into my all-powerful campaign. No, your game is what matters. So we're going to modify our offering to fit your preferences.
So that, I mean, that's such a huge undertaking, but you're right about the divisions and you know, that there's only really 3 games and everything's kind of a subset.
No, there aren't only 3. There are a lot of other great games that I've tried I wished we could address. I've tried Fate Core. Okay. I've tried Burning Wheel. I mean, Luke Crane. I mean, oh my gosh. I mean, I'm a fanboy. Okay. He has done tremendous stuff on that end. There are various other works, somewhat lesser known and lesser sales, but tremendous quality is Jeff Talanian's Hyperborea. Amazing Swordsmen and Sorcerers. It's got a great Conan feel. It's Gygaxian level prose, but cleaner, you know, more. He's learned over working with Gary and over 20 years of experience. Things like this. Jim Raji's Lamentations of the Flame Princess, really edgy, gory, you know, graphic in language and everything. But it's a new way of looking at role playing, a new valid genre approach. Okay, and I'm not an old fuddy-duddy enough to say, get off my lawn, no, we can't have these new ideas. No, absolutely. And these are masterful executions, very playable, very entertaining.
I know, I didn't go on. I didn't mean in the sense that there's only 3, but I mean that you guys, as it refers to you guys and what you're doing with your Kickstarter. No, there is so many amazing RPG games out there, and people are always asking about this game or that game, and I'm like, I wish I just had more time, but there is so many good games and so little time to play them. Yeah,
maybe I have short attention span problem, because I keep looking around at all the great games out there, not just the ones that we, for practical reasons, can only address right now. And we're already talking to various publishers of other systems, and a second wave expansion later down the line on the website and with the crunch books, the whole thing for the set.
So Zaref Gaming has a good question here. And he wanted to know about if you can go into some of the mythos and lore of Empyrea.
That the campaign specific stuff is not system specific. It is not deity specific. It is as general as it gets. We have a post going up soon. Here's a couple examples. One of the active players, and there's one of you folks, one of the people who's a subscriber, is Bloodworth. If you've met Bloodworth in the past through gaming at conventions, in the home games, he's a rather well-known smuggler, roguish guy. He's not lethal, but looks for ways around the edges, okay? He's recently, his place just south of Doran on the coast, his private dockyard and everything, has recently gotten a bit active. And so folks are wondering whether the old retired smuggler is back in business. Certainly his old hangouts on Rockaway Island and that smuggling operation still continues, but under somebody else's affairs, and it's suspected he gets a cut of their action, but who knows? Now, this is one of the campaign sub-stories currently going on, generated by a player. I have another guy who's made his pile a baron in the mountains near Fairway, who technically reports to Prince John at Johnstown. Within that part of the realm, but he has been having a few problems with some raiders from the hills. He's located in that one little mountain area, you know, right along the Great Road. So it's a well-known, well-traveled area, and adventurers are starting to show up asking for jobs because he's had trouble with some of the humanoids in the hills. There's a barbarian tribesman leader who has achieved barony status way off on the east edge in the borderlands. And this is near what they call the Wall, a mile-high cliff that's been there like a million years. Things fall off occasionally, like dinosaurs, and there's a bonus program for who gets the biggest bones and things. That helps the whole cleanup program. But this barbarian has set up shop there in a formalized enclave there in the Eastern Realms, and providing a little stability in that kind of chaotic borderland area. These are just 3 of the various characters created by players already within Imperia Online, the campaign. And they'll start synergizing and interacting with other players, other activities, current events. It's already begun.
Okay, so
what I just said, if you're listening carefully, you didn't hear hardly anything that was game set specific, right? There's so much that can be done with characters, even touching into some game-specific things for specific assets and flavor and stuff, but the bulk of it is characterization, it's character background, and it's dreamed up by you. It's a very flexible setup.
So, you know, so what I'm getting, like, there's a lot of, you got like, you know, a lot of stuff, storylines, NPCs, and that kind of thing. You're saying, but as far as like even the mythos, like pantheons and things like that, aren't included. It's kind of insert whatever pantheon you want.
And we have the rationale for you to plug it in. Behind the scenes on this topic, you have immortal beings running around. They generally don't interfere, number 1. Number 2, they get misinterpreted all the time. People think they're gods, whatever. They are immensely powerful. They're virtually invulnerable to anything mortals can do. So it doesn't go down to, hey, let's go kill Thor or Odin or something. No, that's totally, I mean, they'll just snap their fingers and you're back as an infant somewhere. You know, they can solve problems at that level. But you as the game master can then translate that into your conventional gods granting spells setup, or, you know, your pantheons. You can use a Viking or Norwegian mythos, whatever you like, whatever you're currently using. It's all different interpretations of a meta truth, if you will.
So do you go into like the specifics as far as maybe like different races in Empyrea or how they interact with anyone?
One of the oddities of the imperial realm is, long story short, humans arrived, claimed a continent, said, here we are, we're going to take over everything, like with the Europeans in the early Americas. And instead, since gunpowder doesn't work, personal force decides personal contests. Ranged weaponry like bows and things, sure, but the focus is less on, you know, the peasant who can pick off the Archduke with a pistol, which is what started World War I. Taking that variable out and putting more personal responsibility into combat and activities, the humans arrive on this continent with a lot of attitude, and it turns out this is the homeland of the demi-humans. All the dwarves, elves, everything. This is where they came from. They are wall to wall all over the continent. They've already figured out how to get along, and now the humans have shown up. Oh, great. So the choice is this. Do you wipe them all out on the shore, or do you try and work it out? Their philosophy is, let's try and work it out. They've been doing this for over 5,000 years. So they talk to the humans, and the humans have to make choices and compromises. 300 and some years later, this is where we're at. You have a human realm sticking mostly to river courses, because humans are basically lazy. They like the easy terrain. They like to farm, you know, and just set up near the rivers and be mellow. Generally speaking, you do have adventurous types, but anyway. So you have this human realm surrounded by demi-human realms 100 times as long, of vastly greater power, but you're only able to exist with your human realm due to their good graces and them saying, as long as you humans behave, we can all get along. So, with a lack of technology and a focus on everybody working with the planet and the environment, with a reliance on magic for day-to-day things like light, but not like teleporting and levitating and stuff. That's high magic. So that's not day-to-day magic, okay? But magic to build roads, simply turning mud into rock by removing the water. That's a very basic magical routine. And thus you have rock roads, super highways all over the realm. Other extrapolations like this that make a very realistic looking non-technological world with a 300-year history where everybody's been forced to get along, basically.
I just like the fact that you use the word superhighways in a fantasy setting.
No, they don't have, they have carts, you know, and carriages and things, but they do not have internal combustion. That just doesn't work. So extrapolate medieval into a modern setting, but use magic for what we use technology for. And this is all over Empyrea.
So you said twice now that just doesn't work. So is that something that gets explained in the lore of Empyrea, why science doesn't work?
In 40 years, one of the big hurdles I've run across just in the meta is, do explosions occur or not? Now, we take explosions for granted. A flour mill, you know, can have an accidental kabang. What I did was I tied it into the elemental system of all existence. Instead of molecules and atoms and all that, all of reality is based on earth, air, fire, water. Good old Greek elementalism. As a result of the immortal involvement, you have actual supernatural beings running around who have a definite interest in what's going on the ground, but are limited in how much they can reach down and do. The elemental plane of fire basically decided to curtail explosive effects. Simple one-line answer. What this means is that when you try to light gunpowder, it just burns, you know, maybe a little brighter and faster than usual, but it doesn't go kabam. The only thing that goes kabam is magic, fireballs, things like that.
I love that it's just like the elemental plane of fire. This is their province, and they've just said no.
Right. Basically, no, it's too dangerous for you folks. You tend to burn everything down. It gets out of control. So we're just limiting we're making it easier for you, basically. Forest fires are less devastating, and the druids are very active in this world, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of ramifications to rock superhighways, to things don't explode unless it's magical. Other basic precepts like this that I've applied for 40 years. I've wrung these out inside and out, exactly how they work.
So technically, you know, Empyrea is on Orith. So how much influence did the original Greyhawk setting have on you and the game you're running now? Or, you know, or have you long since left that behind?
I've been out of the habit of using Gary's Greyhawk materials for many years. Imperia took on a life of its own with Gary's advice, actually, now and then. But we had talked about publishing this. We were as one on a lot of the ideas, but he wanted it very different from Greyhawk. I think I've taken it in the other directions that we haven't talked about back when he was alive. But I don't think he would disapprove because he was a gamer. We're all gamers. These are just different ways of approaching some things. In the dedication to Unearthed Arcana, way back in the 80s, Gary mentioned a note to me that to Frank Mentzer, who keeps me more precise and logical. I build systems. I think back to the whys and wherefores of everything at the base of things. And I got Gary to back down on some of his arbitrary decisions because they didn't fit the logical analysis. And it helped guide his further thoughts and developments of new character classes, spells, systems in the 90s and odds. I provided a good, valuable function to my friend, the designer, as well as my friend, the boss, and my personal friend as well. But having a focus on systems, on logic, on the underlying precepts, on what powers magic, I've decided that for this campaign. Actually, it's the energy differential at the planar boundary, which is infinite because the ether is everywhere in tangent to the infinite prime. Anyhow, game chatter, but that's the rationale as to why folk can use magic. Why don't we have magic on real world Earth? That's at least 20 light years away from this planet. First, I'll tell you exactly where they are and what year it is on Terra when all this is happening. That's different for a fantasy campaign. But the reason why magic doesn't work for us here on Earth anymore is because the Immortals truncated the space. They decided literally to give a section of space to humans for a variety of reasons. They think we have potential, basically. But as a result, they decreased the magic because we chose tech here on our planet. But out there where this is going on, there is still extra powers available. There are still areas where magic oppresses technology and vice versa. There's still a war going on between those two sides.
Now, how much of this kind of stuff that you're talking about right now is actually going into Empyrea?
Some of it affects daily life, but minimally. It's more background information for game masters to know, okay, this is where this is. For example, if a game master wants to start a new Starfinder campaign from Paizo, that starts at the stratosphere and takes care of the nearby planets, this system, and the nearby systems. I don't mix science fiction and fantasy, but I put them right next door to one another so you can if you want. Now, remember on Empyrea, two things. Technology is actually forbidden in this realm. They found that works better to get along with the planet, to avoid pollution, to avoid hubris, pride in your creations, and turning away from the gods and magic, all that whole philosophical thing. But there are other factors of extraterrestrials affecting imperial life covertly in the shadows. The undercurrent of the banned technology keeps trying to reach out and infect everybody. And there's background information that guides how you feel if you find a 6-shooter that accidentally dropped as debris, perhaps, from an orbiting ship coming in somewhere for an illegal landing over on the starbase. What if you find something like this, or a ray gun? And how that interfaces with a fantasy world as an anomaly, a weird thing. Does the church seize it? Do you keep it hidden? That might be up to you. Does somebody detect it? Will it work at all? We'll address things like that.
So that that is all just amazing. Like, I love the way you put that stuff together, and I'm sure other gamers are actually going to appreciate that. Just as gamers, because we like to read about the thought process and how and the why, and you've got that covered. Now, there's a question in the chat, and I think they're a little misguided on how things happened, but Mizzo, given
hey Mizzo, I've seen you online.
Given BXCMI is so beloved, I learned on it. Why was AD&D second edition promoted over basic, as a lot of players thought basic game was overall a lot more cohesive and streamlined in design? Like, AD&D happened first, right?
Fair question. And this is about TSR history, really. Happy to address it. I was right in the middle of the whole thing. As many of you know, in the 70s and 80s, there were lawsuits between Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax. The court decision, which I agree with fully, is in essence that Gary would have created the most grand and glorious and amazingly detailed and rich war game campaign that the world had ever seen. And Dave Arneson was the one who introduced the aspect of playing an individual character. Using one figure for one character was the breakthrough at the time. One figure represented a unit of anywhere from 8 to 20 to 100, soldiers in war game terms. So there were these real quantum leaps that Dave provided. Dave's chief liability was a lack of a skill to write out his ideas in long publishable form. So now this is not a diss on Dave, not at all. Brilliant, creative guy. Execution was his flaw because he didn't have the patience for it. His mind was racing along, developing all these great things, and he often worked with other people. Richard Snyder was his partner with Adventures in Fantasy, for example, a game system that he wrote on his own. But Gary provided the engine, basically, and took Dave's role-playing ideas, combined them all into the whole, and built TSR, delivered TSR to D&D to all of us, and it went like that. Now, in the course of the lawsuits, the point was made that Dave didn't stick around to build TSR, to sell the game, anything like that. Gary sacrificed his family, his health, his life to do this. And so many felt that Gary should have gotten the bulk of the money. The judge ruled, though, that without Dave's input, that role-playing element probably would not have occurred, that this would not have been a quantum leap in gaming. Now, I'm good friends with the whole Gygax family. I was a friend of Dave Arneson's at the time while he was alive, and Gary, and all the principals involved here. I see things from a different perspective. I disagree with the Gygax family slightly in crediting Dave with the role-playing invention, quite frankly. But Gary was the one that gave, as I say, everything to bring it to the rest of us. So there's arguments on both sides. Now, here's how this shakes out. After the lawsuits, and all of that was settled, and Dave would get his appropriate funding as a reward, Gary and I had a talk, and I had built the RPGA, and I actually went over to his house, and we knocked a couple of beers and did some game talk, and then got down to serious. And it came down to this. He said, Frank, I need you to do the best you can to build the basic game, the flagship, the thing that started all of this, into a worldwide viable commodity. We're talking many different languages, huge print runs, but it needs to be done absolutely right, and I know you can do it. And he worked with me carefully on the basic set, especially the introductory story and then interactive adventure, using what we had learned through Choose Your Own Adventure books, the Endless Quest books, using techniques step by step, in short, what you see in the red box, the intro version. And it just really gets me in the cockles of my heart when fathers bring out the old red box and use it nowadays to introduce their kids, or young gaming groups to Dungeons and Dragons and to role-playing. Something really worked in that. Gary Spark, my work, whatever. The point is that despite losing the lawsuit against Arneson, despite fighting all he could, Gary's focus was on making sure that the red box line was truly a great, comprehensive, perfectly done, if we could, stand-up product in itself. Advanced was to be focused on the more intense gamer, the person who wanted to slice it down more accurately, more detailed segments of casting instead of just general spell casting, for example, just one of hundreds of examples. As it turned out, Advanced was then seized upon by Wizards of the Coast as the core for development of a lot of later systems from 3.0 and beyond. But they did use a lot of monsters, concepts, spells, and things from my Red Box line as well. But they ended up dropping the name Advanced, but the bulk of the architecture is based on Gary's Advanced systems, Gary and later authors.
We do a thing here where we go into the chat for roll call to see where people are weighing in from. So I want to take a moment to get that started, guys, and we'll keep taking your questions. And it was already answered in the chat, John, but right now it is for Pathfinder 5e RuneQuest. If you go to the Kickstarter page, which is in the description, you can actually see there is a ton of different systems that you're going to be able to play using Imperium. And I also believe someone asked, what system are you currently using to run your games?
I prefer, if I want to do a storytelling game, well, I got started on that with Mark Ryan Hagen's great World of Darkness series and things like that. And there are a variety of storytelling games that have almost no mechanics. To me, that doesn't make a game. You need to have die rolling, you need to have some chart referencing, some specific tie-ins to make it an actual game. My parrot, by the way, is screaming in the background, but my wife just shut him up, so no worries. Amazon parrot, orange wing for bird.
I'm just picturing someone back there holding a bird by its beak.
Right? No, it's more favors. And here, have a peanut. Shut up. In my home game, I've thus dropped a lot of the mechanics, but I use most of the characters are based on 2e Advanced, some 1e. Stuff in there. Most of my mechanics are either Advanced or from my Red Box, but frankly, I throw a lot of them out in favor of action. Generally, when there's various die rolls and mechanics that over-examine individual unexciting things. Oh, make your check die roll to see if you light a fire. That's just not my style. That's background stuff. You might as well roll to see if you digested dinner well enough to be functional for a battle an hour later, or swimming. Oh, you'll cramp, better roll a die to check, see if you'll cramp when you swim because you just ate a sandwich half hour ago. I mean, there are a lot of things you can do wrong when you go that direction. What my basic mechanic most often used is call a D10. You simply roll 1d10, call whether you want high or low. I've already decided in my head, like 2 seconds earlier, what percentage, roughly, chance of success you have. I can take it on either end. That's easy enough. And so a lot of incidental activities, okay, call a D10. All right, yes, you do remember something about that. Yeah, you did manage to ride by the fire without it harming you on your horse, and you can pivot and then react on the other side of the lines. Things like that, all sorts of variables.
Cool. So basically a mishmash of the different things that you've played and your own stuff.
Yeah. But the die rolls are fair, but they're quick and dirty and approximate, and we keep the action going.
Just the way I like it.
Yeah.
So going into the chat, we got Todd from Dallas, Doug's in Cleveland. We've got London in the house with Mizo. Zaref Gaming is in Rodizio, New Mexico. Red Jackal, Florida. Regilia, who's in Utah. We got Kuwait in the house with Poison. We've got Georgia with Brian, AJ Kinney, Lopez Island, Washington. Paris, Tennessee is Dalto. Raven is in the OZ. We got Kevin in Michigan. We've got Circleville, Ohio in the house with Geek in Undies.
All right.
We've got
nice lineup. Thanks, everybody. I heard New Mexico go by. My folks used to live in Santa Fe. I can half draw you a map of Albuquerque, and I love Cloudcroft, looking down over the White Sands.
We have people coming in from all over the place, like Santa Barbara with Sean, Pittsburgh with Spellhawk Press. We've got all right. So now we're back into questions.
All righty. Well, greetings, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
So Doug has a question. Does Bargle exist in Empyrea?
Common question. As many of you know, Bargle is the big bad in the Red Box, and he mercilessly slays this lovely cleric you meet And I have been condemned for this many times, but you know I had to kill somebody in the intro adventure. I don't possibly build it up to where you develop a favorite character and you get all kinds of stressed out if you lose it. It's just a game, so I had to do that. Bargle has been an ongoing bad guy in many home campaigns. One year at Gen Con, I saw some giants, actually just very tall people from Scotland, wearing bright yellow shirts saying, "Bargle must die." They had this whole thing going in Scotland, you know, against Bargle, around 1990 or so. I've often wondered why other game systems didn't bake in a big bad that would give you motivation for revenge and get you adventuring and give you a subplot there. It seems like hardly anybody ever did that. But Bargle lives on in Imperia. He's, of course, affiliated with our big bad. And that's a whole major undercurrent. And in the storyline, actually, Imperia is fated to vanish. All 2,100 square miles of this legendary capital city, this new experiment in ecology and freedom and everything, and it goes poof. Luckily, most of the bad guys go poof at the same time, but this is all foretold and predicted coming up in about 10 years or less. So there are rough times ahead for the realm. Be prepared.
So Geek and Undies has let out the cry of Alina the Cleric.
Yes, poor Alina. She was actually named for my girlfriend back in the 70s, whose name was Aileen. And I met another Aileen when I arrived at TSR, the only two I've ever known to date. The second one was actually the daughter of one of Gary's best friends from childhood. It was interesting. So with Aileen showing up twice, Alina had to be the one who was there. Unfortunately, since she was the only other active character in the adventure, she was the one who had to die. That was not a statement on women, old girlfriends, or anything of the sort. She just got credited by being named and portrayed, and then unfortunately was stuck with the short end of the stick in terms of the story.
I get that's one of the downsides of having a name. So Mizo has a question. He's referencing Margaret Weiss here, once said that magic systems, it's the limits of the magic systems that make them special. Do you think that in current high magic worlds, we've lost a bit of that? Does magic need limits?
I really loved Baker's Eberron for a while. And then the ubiquity of magic in so many aspects of life started to wear me down, frankly. So I pulled back, and I think a lot of people saw that. Now, it was great gaming, you know, and certainly worth buying, but it sort of had a built-in expiration date. My friend Rob Schwalb took a different tack on the expiration date idea. The Shadow of the Demon Lord is a complete campaign designed to be played in 11 or 12 games. Bang, done, over, and then you can do it again. So this sort of thing has been addressed professionally, and I've liked the way some have gone to it. I think my head just wandered off into other game systems, though, and I forgot the core question. I'm sorry. I'm a gamer, you know, happens.
It happens, no worries. I guess the core question is, do you feel like magic needs limits?
Yeah. Yeah, thinking about Keith's Eberron and things like that. Imperia does start with a startling and possibly upsetting premise that magic is everywhere because tech isn't, like the superhighways. But as I pointed out in passing, no, you don't use levitation to deliver skid loads of goods. That's excessive. No, you don't find magic stuff laying about everywhere. Yes, you can go in and buy a +2 sword. The security system will just turn your hair white when you read about it. You'll realize there is no bloody way you're going to steal this thing. Ain't gonna happen. Yeah, I'm pretty good at that stuff, okay? Especially when I have immortal power to play with. That's a little clue there. But it turns out you go in, oh my gosh, I can actually buy a +2 sword. That sucks. Magic should be rare. And then you find out that it costs 1.2 million gold pieces and you don't have a chance of affording it. And you realize it's in perspective. In a world with superpowers, with 30th level wizards traveling to other planes who visited real world Earth in the late 4000s and know about this tech nightmare there, and magic doesn't work very well, you know, a greater awareness of all existence, of the powers behind the scenes, magic for sale becomes a lot less of a concern. at that level, at super high levels. So really, we're talking about daily life. The only intrusions, if you will, are the fact that every farmer and his brother has a continual light coin or pebble that he got from the church. And there's family reading time in the evenings, thanks to the light provided by the gods, that sort of thing. But it's not in your face, there goes a magical thingy walking by or floating by on a daily basis. No, most of it is straightforward, medieval, kind of rough life with monsters out there. You probably at low levels work for the thin green line, they call it. The constabulary handles people-to-people problems in towns, you know, that sort of thing. You don't want to get into that unless you're a bouncer type or something like that. No, mostly as an adventurer or would-be, you've joined the crew that helps protect the villages and towns from the monsters that are right out there in the woods, the thin green line. And this is where you learn your basic chops, plug into the national guild system, and eventually grow up and decide to head for the royal city, plug into the big guilds, and find out what the adventurers are really doing out there. And that's the start of your career.
So you've kind of like... you've just cut in passing, you mentioned the Immortals a couple times here. What are the Immortals? And is it kind of like a throwback to the box set you worked on?
Quite. I use the same basic meta setup of, in brief, everything that exists is made of matter, one sphere, imbued with energy, has purpose or will or thought, and to whatever limited degree, in some cases, like blobs and things. And they exist within time, a context. And these four things make up everything. And the Immortals, short story, they were coming from someplace and on their way somewhere, and they ran across something that was reality and stopped to play with it for a few billion years. They were the first gamers. And they're still out there, and they're still messing around, but they've learned not to interfere with the game while it's being played, generally. There is, however, one group of Immortals who has free carte blanche. They can do anything. They can reach down and screw with the game all they want, and that's the Entropics. These are the guys that include everything from skeletons all the way on up to high lich lords, whose job is to tear everything down. Because without endings, everything has no purpose, it turns out. And this is one of the benefits of the Immortals from their grand and glorious perspective. So they provided time, death, and all these things that make up all existence that we know of it. But they don't mess with it, basically, except for the Entropics, the undead, all the forces of darkness, who are actually out there working for the same team just to make sure everything has an ending as well as a beginning. So there's this weird perspective of the Immortals, but they're in the background. Don't worry about them at all unless you get into super high-level play. But they provide a rationale to explain almost everything that's going on down here on the ground.
Well, I feel like there's a lot of really great story seeds that can come from that.
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily high level either. When things start going weird or funky, like it gives the GM an explanation and like a greater picture that they can kind of begin to paint with that in the backdrop somewheres. So how do the Immortals stack up to, say, a pantheon of gods? To me, it sounds like they're kind of like above and beyond.
Actually, in the backstory, and this is, again, in the set, mentioned for the Game Master's background, super deep background information. A long time ago, in a different branch of this galaxy, the Immortals decided to investigate humans. Our time, it was circa 5,000–6,000 BC. They hung out with us for about 5,000 years, keeping an eye on things, guiding us here and there. You can think analogies like the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey might be a figurative expression of their influence. The Greek gods of Olympus might be another translation, or the description of the gods of Mesopotamia, Babylonia. These things at the dawn of human civilization. And in the backstory, they realized, in their infinite wisdom, that mankind might, just might, be the one race in the entire multiverse who can replace the Immortals in the long run. And they're looking to put themselves out of a job. They want to get back on their trip to whatever the heck they were headed for in the first place before they decided, they ran across this reality and decided to mess with it for a while.
So okay, that is like fascinating, and this is like you keep saying like the deep DM background stuff, but I feel like someone who buys into a campaign setting, that's what they're buying into. That's really what they want. You know, they're going to want this kind of stuff that's going to distinguish Imperium from classic Greyhawk or Faerun playing Forgotten Realms or playing Ebron. You know, they're looking for a specific take. And this is your take. So that deep stuff that I think that, and that's the stuff the chat seems to be really responding to, and what they're really interested in.
But I have to point out that the bulk of D&D players and other role players these days are not folks like us. They're folks who have tried 5e, thanks to the fabulous job that was done with that and all the publicity, and they're not as deep into the background stuff. And they're looking at it as, yeah, that's nice, but what are we going to play this week? Okay, which adventure? What are we going to go do? And so that really is our main focus on activities of ordinary characters, ordinary players on a day-to-day basis. But we will provide you, I mean, I've been doing this 40 years. I have answered virtually every campaign question you can possibly imagine in 40 years of gaming. Twice. At conventions, in face-to-face groups, online, you name it. And it's all this info is there as support structure.
Perfect. We are coming up on the hour mark.
Wow.
So what do you want to leave folks off with?
Imperia is a backdrop. I'm offering you an additional tool. It's not a game system. I get little shipping benefits on that, by the way. Since there's no dice and it's not a game system in itself, a lot of customs in Europe say, oh, it's books and maps. It's not a game, which is a different category. But it is another tool for you, the game master, to put in your bag and use. We encourage you to add another campaign world as an option. Set up gateways to it, perhaps. We'll give you lots of ways to do it. If you wish, thank you much, and go ahead and start a campaign in Imperia. It'll handle that too. But it's not offered as a replacement for what you're doing. We want you to keep using the game system you choose, and we're already making great progress on the logistics of handling different approaches behind the scenes. We'll all come together and role play through Imperia Online, which has already begun, not a computer generated, okay? Using real game masters, me with a staff of game masters for the regional areas, et cetera, et cetera. Develop your character, interact, and start another game there on the side. So it's all part of one package. You'll need the core set to play, and our Kickstarter is currently running.
So you guys, there's links to the socials and to the website in the description. You can check that out. Thanks everyone for hanging out with us today. And I want to thank you, Frank, for coming on. I can't wait to see this project get funded. It's an amazing, it's amazing. The number of people that you have involved on this project is just insane. When I first, before we started, I was talking about, I went and looked at the Kickstarter page, and it's like, before I even looked at what the goal was, I'm like, this has got to be like $1 million Kickstarter, but because I'm looking at all the talent. You got David Zeb Cook, Ed Greenwood, Alan Hammock, Tracy Hickman, Harold Johnson, Tim Kask, Len Lehman.
Good old Leomund. Any 1E players? You remember Leomund? Leomund's Tiny Hut, the Tiny Hut articles in old 70s Dragons? Yes, Len Lecoca himself is part of those.
We got Steve Marsh, Douglas Niles, James M. Ward, Skip Williams, the original Sage before Jeremy Crawford, and Margaret Weiss is doing the forward. And and then that's without even getting into the artists, which you have legendary artists on there as well. This is just such an impressive endeavor. And like I said, I can't wait to see this get kickstarted and get funded. So guys, go support this project. This is going to be amazing. A lot of times we have people on here and we're like, this is cool, you can check it out. But this is one I think people should definitely support to get this conglomeration of talent all in one spot. Like they just
aside from the talent, we are putting a renewed emphasis on personal service and the online game that will interact with you by email, develop your character, and you can shape Imperial canon in the process.
So with that, guys, thank you everyone for checking this out, hanging out with us today. Thanks again for coming on, Frank. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.